G'day everyone, welcome back to another edition of Guvs Hero Review videos. We are continuing in our past Hero of the Month series, looking specifically at the 5-star legendary purple heroine, Parsec, the Duel Wielding Pistol Ranger. So Parsec first came into PuzzleCombat as the featured Hero of the Month back in August 2023. Today, however, you can only summon her from the Manor of Legends portal, which comes around once every 4 weeks. This portal does have some of the most horrendous odds in the game, I'm sorry to say, particularly when you're going after a specific hero and they are unfeatured. The portal odds on that topic, so we can see there is a 1% chance for a featured hero and a 0.9% chance for an unfeatured past Hero of the Month. So if we were to break this down and take a bit of a look, if we were to do 100 summons in this portal, you would have on average a 63.4% probability of getting either of the two featured heroes of the month, and only a 59.5% probability of getting any of the unfeatured heroes of the month. Now, that is for any random one from those pools. If you were to go after a specific hero, the odds drop off considerably. So in those same 100 summons, if you were going specifically for one of the two featured heroes of the month, it would be just a 39.4% probability. And if you're going after someone specific in the unfeatured pool, it drops down to just a 2.6% probability. So in every 100 people that do 100 summons in this portal, just under 2 or just under 3 of them, would get the specific unfeatured hero they're looking for. So not great odds at all. And I will point out that that final number is going to diminish further as more heroes of the month are added to this portal. So currently there's 34 unfeatured heroes. So as more get added in, that's obviously going to drop off further. So let's quickly flip over and we can take a look at her full artwork. So there is Parsec's full artwork. So she is titled the Duel Wielding Pistol Ranger. So obviously she needs to have 2 pistols. The artwork is a little bit, janky, I guess, on the pistols. It looks a bit flat compared to some of the detail that's in some of the other ones. Obviously got a suit and tights on. There's no real getting around any of that. But yeah, that's sort of her artwork. So feel free to pause it if you like. There's not really too much evidence of her being a ranger or anything like that. If anything, she's probably less military or army-like and more, private cop or something like that. I don't know. But that's her artwork, so feel free to pause it if you wish. Otherwise, let's head back over and continue looking at her card. So as with all of these past heroes of the month, normally I would discuss the heroes family bonus, but we can see that the heroes of the month still do not have a family bonus at the time of this recording. So obviously there might be one that gets added down the track, but at this point in time, there's nothing that's going to give them any bonus for being of the same family as other heroes. Her personal stats, so Parsec comes in with 704 attack, 782 defense, and 1,441 HP. So there is a little bit of a skew there. The attack is a little bit low, and her defense and mostly defense stats are a bit elevated. So there is a bit of a skew going there from her attack to her defense. Her power is the other thing to note, so she does have 719 as her total power. This is a little bit reduced compared to some of the more modern heroes of the month. So if we take a quick look out of the portal, we can see the newest one, Dynasty, comes in with 732, same as Thunk's 731. So there is a little bit of a reduction. So all that means is that their power reflects their total base stat distribution. So more power means more stats. So she is a bit reduced compared to some of those newer heroes of the month. Her charge speed is set to 57 speed, which is average speed and requires 10 tiles to charge or 5 ghosted tiles. She's actually not very far at all off the speed break, so a speed break to 9 tiles to charge needs just +1. It occurs at 58 speed, so you can do that using any of the purple guns in game. You've got the +6 Pearl Scale Convex, which is a 5-star gun, and you've also got the 5-star Inksplosion B90, which gives +9. Alternatively, if you don't want to use a speed gun, you can get that single single break using just the charge generation node from her class tree. As a support class member, that does happen at plus 20, so it is a long way down her tree to get that single break. The double break needs plus 8, so it occurs at at 73 is where that one occurs. So obviously the plus 9 speed gun gets you there with relative ease. Alternatively, you can actually do it with the plus 6 Pearl Scale Convex, but you do have to combine that with the 4% class charge generation node. So the charge node, it's not really relevant if you've got a B90, an explosion B90 that you can chuck on her, because then you get both the single and the double break. However, if you are going to run a different weapon, then it might actually be worth picking up that plus 20 charge generation node. We've sort of mentioned it a couple times, but Parsec is a member of the support class, which grants her the chance to withstand negative status effects and charge drain effects. So it is a pretty good perk. There's nothing, really wrong with it. It does grant her the chance to withstand all of those nasty ailments that come her way, and then combining that with the withstanding charge cut effects, and it gives her an opportunity for full immunity against all charge controls. Which is really good. It's kind of like the inverse, really, of the recon talent. So the recon talent, you evade damage and pick up bonus charge, whereas the support talent, you would take the damage, but you withstand effects and the charge cut. So a little bit of a flipsy-roozy there. So yeah, by way of an actual emblem path, for Parsec, I would probably just go an all-out attack path. She is predominantly a damage dealer in her skill, so that's sort of what I would be doing. I'll just switch this over to class and then do a bit of scrolling. Spy, support. So yeah, I'd be going a full-on attack path. So it would look very similar to what I've done here on Amethyst in terms of the attack path. So we are obviously... It's not Amethyst, it would be Parsec. So we'd pick up each of the attack nodes. So you can see I've gone attack, and I've chosen defense as my secondary effect. That's just my personal preference. I tend towards picking up defense over HP. It's just how I've always sort of done it. Ultimately, in the damage calculation, it's a dealer's choice. It makes no real difference whether you pick up the defense or the HP nodes. It comes out as much of a muchness. So yeah, that's sort of the path I would follow if I was to get Parsec and level her. Obviously, plus 18 gives you an attack bonus, and plus 19 is the attack percentage bonus one, and plus 20 is the speed node. So for me, I personally wouldn't pick up the plus 20 node, just because I have a couple B90s that I can equip to her, so I don't really need the 4% charge generation. So as a result, I'd probably stop at about plus 18. I'd either stop at plus 19 for the last attack node, or I'd stop at the plus 16 point, which is the last attack node. That's cheap. So either way, though, we are following this path the whole way down the tree. And then it's up to you whether you get the 19 and the 20th nodes as you need them. So yeah, feel free to pause that further if you need, but otherwise, let's head back over to her card and we can take a look at her special skill. So her special skill is titled Shocker Bullets. And at level 10 skill and 57 charge speed, it will deal 210% damage to the target, with an additional 210% damage dealt to 3 random enemies. This attack will bypass defensive buffs, including counterattacks. It will then apply the shock ailment to all hit enemies, which deals 112 damage per each buff received for the next 3 turns. So we'll obviously break that down a little bit, but there's a couple of things that I sort of need to talk to before we start diving into the damage and that comparison. So the first thing I want to address is the targeting, so to speak. So Parsec is what I like to call a multi-hitter. So these are heroes that hit multiple enemies or more than one enemy, but there is random targeting as to who they get hit. So your typical heroes, they're targeted nearby or all enemies. So these are your area of effect or damage over area heroes. Parsec and others like her, you don't have that control. It will hit one enemy that you select, and then it will just randomly attack other enemies based on what the AI decides to hit. So I will point out two things with it. So number one, it executes sequentially, so it will always do the first hit, again, like that first dot point, and then it will do the rest of them randomly. So this means that you can have multiple strikes on the same enemies, but it also means that you can waste shots by over-hitting an enemy. So if, for example, Parsec was to target someone, the random components, and they only needed 1 hit's worth of damage to die, but they ended up taking 3, there's nothing in the logic sequence that stops that same target from being hit multiple times after they're already quote-unquote dead. The only exception is if they die to the initial target, so that initial dot point, then they won't get hit by the random ones, because as I said, it executes sequentially. So by way of comparison, obviously I always compare heroes based on their attack power. If you've watched my review videos, you'd know this well enough. So it just simplifies things. It's analogous in the end to the damage that a hero would do. More attack power means more damage, but it simplifies the calculation and removes some of that variability that we see in the damage calc. So in the case of Parsec, her attack power is her attack stat, 704, multiplied by the number and the percentage in her skill. So in the case of Parsec, we can see that she comes out with a final, I've calculated out a final attack power per tile of 591, which lands her in 4th spot of the multi-hitter. So how I got to this was I obviously calculated the single attack, which is the 210% by the 704. I then multiplied it by 4 because there's 4 shots in total, and then divided that by the number of tiles to charge her skill. So that's how we got to 591, and we've repeated this process for the other multi-hitters in this list. So yeah, number 4 is pretty good ultimately. There's 12 multi-hitters in the game at this point in time. I'm sure more will get added because they are a very good class of hero, but at this point in time there are only 12 of them in total, and Parsec is number 4. Obviously, the top 3 are substantially better. You know, you've got Variant Emma, Tightwire, and Vision. They're all in the 700s of their attack power per tile. Parsec is down at 591, so about 160 odd behind the best in Variant Emma. And then there is a very big step up from the ones that are lower down that list. You know, you've got Mastodon and Pollux at 447 and 408. You've got Terminus at 329, Deadeye 311, and down the bottom is Letitia, who's the only other purple multi-hitter at 272. So Parsec is a massive improvement from Letitia, like a huge improvement, and obviously still very good compared to a lot of the other heroes in this list. So yeah, number 4 of the 12 multi-hitters in terms of her damage output. The next part of her skill that we'll quickly /longly look at in a bit of detail is the line about the bypass. So the attack bypasses defensive buffs, including counterattacks. So it reads a little bit janky, where it sort of sounds as if it's only applying to the damage component of her skill. In reality, this line is applying to all of the elements of her skill. So it's not just the damage which bypasses defensive buffs, it's all of the secondary effects. Now, you're probably thinking, but defensive buffs, they don't really matter for ailments, and typically that is true. The defensive buffs in counterattack, they only really affect direct damage. However, there is some instances where this bypass does affect buffs which are not quote-unquote defensive. So what I mean by this is historically, SGG have defined defensive buffs as being buffs which directly affect the defense stat. So we're talking things like defense bonus or defense against special skill, or even the elemental defense buffs that we get. However, at some point along the way, SGG have changed that definition from the long-standing definition in both PuzzleCombat and Empires and Puzzles, and there's now a bit more of a broad category of buffs which are now quote-unquote defensive. So the most notable ones in this new classification are ailment immunity and ailment reflect buffs. So where this becomes relevant is normally or ordinarily, these two buffs would either make you immune to new status ailments or they would reflect them back to the caster. However, for heroes that have this sort of skill, they will then pierce or bypass through that immunity and apply their ailments, in the case of Parsec, the shock ailment, to those heroes that are quote-unquote immune anyway. So I will say I don't really understand why there has been this change in the classifications. I suspect it was a case where there was a bug in the game, and rather than actually fixing and rectifying it, SGG took the simple way out and just made it a feature, which they have done with a variety of other bugs. I have other documented examples of this being the way that SGG have dealt with bugs. I won't comment much more on it because 1, I don't agree with it. 2, it annoys me, and 3, I think that personally the way that bypass works in the game right now, particularly with it being able to bypass immunity, is probably a bit too much, particularly when you consider that immunity is by definition you're meant to be immune to the new effects. So I don't know. Whatever, as it is right now, there's very little that you can actually do in the game to prevent Parsec and others of her ilk from attaching their ailments to you. Like, you can't stop it. She's going to pierce through any defensive or ailment shields that you might put up. The only thing that really works is taunt, but even then, it's just redirecting it. It's not actually stopping it from applying. Dodge is obviously the other thing you can do. So anyway, moving on from that bypass, because as I said, kind of riles me up. The final part of her skill is the shock ailment. So shock, the targets receive 112 damage whenever they receive a buff for 3 turns. So this does apply to all hit enemies, even though it says the targets, which normally implies just the people that you're aiming at. So this is all hit enemies. So that's the first thing. So if she hits 4 different enemies with her 4 random shots, then all 4 of them are going to get the shock ailment. The quantity and duration at 112 and 3 turns, this is normal for the shock ailment. It's consistent with the majority of occurrences of shock in the game. There are a couple that run for 4 turns and a couple that have a higher shock value, but pretty much all of them in the game are 112. Couple things to note with this. So number 1, because of the random targeting of Parsec, it does mean that you're not always going to get 4 instances of shock out. If she targets the same enemy 2 or 3 times, they will only receive 1 shock ailment because it's an ailment which will overwrite previous examples of it. So if even though you can do 4 instances of damage, you might end up with a situation where you hit the same enemy 2, 3, 4 times, in which case you get less instances of the shock ailment out. Now, this just matters for things like the buff booster tournament, where you lose the ability to control where that shock ailment is actually applying, and it hands it over basically to the AI. So that's the first thing to note, and that is relatively unique, so to speak, to Parsec. There's not many other heroes that are sort of suffering from this. The second thing to note is that it is per each buff, even though it says each time they receive a buff, it is per each buff. So a hero like Senya, who gives out 2 buffs, that's going to deal 2 instances of the 112 damage to that one hero. The final thing to note is that for whatever reason, shock is classed as a turn-based damage effect, even though it has literally nothing to do with the turns or the passage of turns. You could have all 3 turns and get 0 shock damage because there's just no buffs. Or you could sometimes have some damage and other times have heaps. So it's very different from your traditional turn-based damage, where you get a set amount of damage each turn, and that will apply regardless of whatever else is happening in the game. But for whatever reason, again, I suspect it's a case where it was a bug made a feature, the shock ailment is classed as turn-based damage. So this does mean that it can be bolstered by DOT enhancers, such as Torrent or Whipster as 2 examples. It can also be affected by dampeners like the zombie class. They're all 50% immune to DOT effects. It can also be flipped over to healing for heroes that convert DOT to healing. So Pika variant or Dasher variant are 2 examples of that effect. So I will say, again, I disagree with this classification because, once again, the shock ailment has nothing to do with the passage of time. It's not turn-based at all. It is entirely a proc effect, meaning that it has to have something happen to trigger the damage. It doesn't just happen on its own. So again, don't agree with it, but again, SGG seem to have made this the feature and the way it's apparently meant to execute. So whatever. So overall for Parsec, I think she's actually a very highly effective damage dealer. particularly for attack teams, just by virtue of being a multi-hitter. She is a strong multi-hitter. We saw there number 4 of the 12 options, but she's also got that inherent bypass in her skill, which gives her a lot of usefulness against defense-heavy or buff-heavy teams, against counter-attack, but also being able to chuck that shock element out regardless of what the defense team or the enemy team are going to put up. The shock element is a really nice little bonus. Again, because she is a multi-hitter, you lose that control, and you can result in some situations where you don't get the full effect of the shock, and that is something that you just can't really get around with Parsec. I'd say probably some really great combinations for Parsec would be with Mirage, or Mirage variant, sorry, who does area of effect elemental defense down. So she does the purple defense down to 3 enemies or target and nearby. So that gives you a bit of a better spread to enhance Parsec's damage. The other really great combo, and this is for all multi-hitters basically, is Blunderbuss, because Blunderbuss will essentially pump her damage up phenomenally, and because she's a multi-hitter, even when there's only 1 target on the board left, you're still going to get those 4 hits on that 1 enemy and really just KO them essentially. So with Blunderbuss, obviously there is the miss chance that's introduced, so a way to combat that is to use an accuracy gun like the Lancehead MA2020, which is an accuracy gun that combats Blunderbuss quite well. So yeah, some really great uses for Parsec out there. So for her grading, I am going to give her a B+ for war and raid attack situations. As I said, multi-hitters are really great. The shock element and the bypass do give her a lot of versatility and usefulness in a lot of different teams. Against War Machines, I'm going to drop it down to a C+. She doesn't really work in War Machine teams. She's going to do damage, but she's not really a staple that should be added to every War Machine team. There's not really anything she's doing specifically for War Machine users. In the events, I'm going to push her back up to a B+. She is a multi-hitter. Multi-hitters are far and away the best option to use in event competition because you get a lot of damage output even when there are reduced enemies. So really great option. As I said, combined with Blunderbuss, each shot is processed individually to get maximum amount of damage output from that. For the war and raid attack defenses, I'm going to give her a B grade here. I think I personally think she's best suited to the flank position, although she can work okay in the wing. But yeah, I'd say flank is probably her best position on a defense team. In our 3 tournament settings, so we've got the Bloody Battle effect up front, so there's nothing really for or against her in Bloody Battle, so I'm going to give her a B grade on attack and a B grade on defense. In the buff booster tournaments, I'm going to give her an A- on attack and a B+ on defense. She's obviously got the shock element that works really well to counter the buff booster tournament effect, but also with the bypass, that also works really well to countering buff heavy defenses. Finally, we have the charge attack tournament, so this is where her speed is improved from 57 up to 65, so it is a fair speed improvement. So I'm going to give her a B+ for charge tournament attack and a B grade for charge tournament defense. So overall, that comes out as being a B grade for Parsec's overall attack grade and a B for her overall defense grade. And that concludes the content for this review of Parsec. As always, these are just my personal thoughts and opinions on these heroes. I do love hearing your thoughts and feedback on them, so please do feel free to jump down to the comment section and leave me a note. I love reading and try to reply as much as I can. If you found the video to be good, useful, helpful, and all of that, feel free to like it, subscribe to my channel, but most importantly, share the video around, because if this sort of thing is useful for yourself, chances are it's also going to be useful to other people you play with as well. Thank you once again for tuning in and joining me. I do hope I'll see you again soon, but until then, good luck, stay safe, and happy gaming. Cheers, bye!